Awesome. Well, what do you think about when you think of standard operating procedures or SOPs? Are they common? Do you use them a lot? Do you not see them? Are they uncommon? Are they useful? There's a lot of aspects of it, including how does AI factor into SOPs? So that's the first topic we're going to talk about today. Secondly, we're going to be talking about how is AI possibly furthering the criminals' access to us via, we'll just say criminal chatbots. I don't know. We're going to talk about cybersecurity from an AI perspective for a little bit. Those are the two topics today. Welcome to another edition of AI Insights with Stephen Bowman, software guru, AI expert, and me, Mike Russell. So let's jump into it. Standard operating procedures. Are they standard? What, in fact, what is meant by standard, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff there. So kick it off and we'll go through it.
Awesome, awesome. So, anybody who's tuning in or seeing this, you'll know that last week Mike and I broached on this subject, and it was clear that it deserved its own time. It definitely deserved its own time, and here it is. So, standard operating procedure. So, when I think of standard operating procedure, I get excited, but I'm an engineer and a nerd and a geek, and I do software, and I've been in mental process for a long time. But I've also spent some time in corporate America. It's been a while. I'm very proud to say that I just had an anniversary, and that was it. It was unceremonious. So at the end of August, I actually celebrated when I realized it in September, 20 years of being completely independent as an entrepreneur. I've been paving my own way in one shape or form for 20 years straight now. But I did have clients in corporate America throughout those 20 years, as well as coming from corporate America in one shape or form. And when I hear standard operating procedure, when I think of standard operating procedure, I think of a guide. I think of a way that should be followed, that's been agreed upon by a boss and a group of people who actually do the work, or just the boss says, hey, you guys know how to do this process, this procedure, this work effort, this workflow, and we're going to pencil it out. We're going to document it. We're going to put it in a Visio document. We're going to put it on the whiteboard for everybody to see, and everybody can reference that whenever they've got a question on how to do something, quote unquote, the right way. That's not a lot of the feedback that I get when I say the word standard operating procedure to clients, potential clients, friends, partners, people at networking events. Instead, I get a lot of groans. I get
Really?
uh, yeah, no, we've got them. They're in a book somewhere. Nobody ever looks at them. That's probably the most common response I get.
Oh, okay. So like binderware, shelfware, it's in a binder somewhere up on the shelf.
Yeah. The other, so I usually throw out an analogy, and I get a lot of head nodding, and I get a lot of claps, and I get a lot of people who say, yep, that's it. And that is quite literally, a Word document that's been printed out, that's in a laminated uh, binder slip, right, that you can clip into that 3-ring binder. But instead of it being in the 3-ring binder, it's, thumbtacked to the boss's wall, the little fuzzy wall behind their computer monitor, or, in somebody's cubicle somewhere. I don't get the feeling from anyone. I've yet to bump into anybody so far. I've probably had 40 or 50 conversations about this in the last couple of weeks. Um, just asking everybody. It's a topic of conversation for me, which is why it's so pertinent here and the work that I'm doing. I've yet to have anybody come to me and say, yes, most important thing, it's up to date, and we update it regularly because it's part of our ceremony, whether it's a meeting or whatever it is. So with that in mind, I know that you and I have a different paradigm, right? We've got a different viewpoint on talking to people about this kind of stuff and the things that we've experienced. Can you talk about SOPs from your side?
Well, I don't necessarily disagree with the viewpoints and a lot of the pushback you're getting from the standpoint that let's talk about when SOPs, standard operating procedures, aren't useful.
Sure.
One, they're not
Yes.
kept up to date, so they don't reflect the actual work that needs to be done. So if somebody's going to do the work well, they need to do something different that's on the SOP. The SOP is for something maybe not important or maybe, um, not that can be standardized. And what I mean by that, the most useful SOPs are the ones that are for recurring work, right? So it makes no sense to make an SOP for something that's done once and done with it, right? I can do a plan for that kind of work and follow, see if I'm following a plan, but to standardize the work when it's only a one shot makes no sense either. It
Sure.
also makes no sense if people aren't trained on them, if they're not accountable for them, if it's supposed to be standard. I mean, there's just a whole litany of things, and when it comes down to is is the work standard, meaning that it should be standardized in some form to get the result that we want, right? And that means that there aren't many variations, or the variations can be handled within the SOP. Um, it should be updated. In fact, one of the interesting things about, we'll call it standard work, right? There's in Japan or companies that follow closely uh, Toyota ways of working, is this concept of standard work. It's like an SOP, right? It's so, what do I need to know to be able to do the work excellently? And then I execute on it. Um, but there's also the expectation that the individual workers are responsible for improving or update, well, first in updating or suggesting that SOP be updated as needed. And secondly, improving their work in some way at least once every year and updating the SOP accordingly. So that's a very different mindset, right? It's different from someone pushing this SOP on me, and I feel like it's an inconvenience because it's not the work I'm actually doing. Nobody cares about it anyway. To, okay, let's use this for the work that we're doing now. Help us guarantee excellence with what we're doing, quality, whatever you want to call it. And let's keep it updated as a normal function of our work. That last part is critical. It's like anything else, right? Do you know that half of managers don't want to manage? They just want, I mean, you've seen this before. They just want the jobs for position, for more pay, right? Authority, but just because they want to, be able to direct people, whatever. Well, part of management, even assuming that whether you should be there or not, is that the priority is to manage or to lead. It's not to do the other work, and just manage when you have time. The same comes with this. It's just, I think it's an expectation thing, it's an accountability thing, and it's really a misunderstanding of when and how SOPs can be effectively applied. And you and I, come from automation backgrounds. So if there are things that can be well, can have, not can be, or can have standard operating procedures, or the work can be standardized. Those are the prime candidates for automation.
Yeah,
Let the people
absolutely.
do the non-standard things or the exception things, right? I mean, that was always the prime criteria is, let me try to optimize this business process. And then what are the repeating things or repeatable things in there? And then those were always the candidates for putting the effort in to automate because they were going to be done over and over and over. So I don't think it's necessarily out of line. It's just I have the different view that I think there are valuable, can be incredibly valuable. It's just that A, we don't need SOPs for everything. B, you know, if we don't have any SOPs at all, and we are doing standard work, then we're probably not doing as good a job as we should be.
It, something struck me so strongly in what you just said, and it feels like it's it's leadership and culture that really drives this down. And um, is that does that strike a note with you? Does that?
Yeah, yeah, this is, and it's not just leadership, right? But the cultural component that you're talking about is what does it mean to be successful in this job? What does quality mean? What are we trying to deliver to our customers or to our stakeholders, right? What does all that mean? And am I responsible for delivering that high level quality, quantity, whatever the success criteria are for that job or not, right? And do I take any ownership in that?
Absolutely. Ownership, responsibility, accountability. Absolutely. Phenomenal stuff. Um,
I'll use a different word, right? So here is what sometimes when I hear people say that, I mean, other two things, and it could be a both, not just an it could be an either or both. One is that's not really part of my job. It really doesn't add anything, right? To keep this thing updated. I'm not, I don't get rewarded for updating it. It's not pertinent anymore. It's binderware, shelfware, all those things, right? The ownership part. Um, the second interpretation and part of the feeling is that, let's go to your boss with the thing pinned to the wall, is I'm being micromanaged,
okay.
right? That feeling of somebody's telling me how I should do the detail work. I'm telling me how to do the work, as opposed to, hey, we've generally found these are the common components to success. Let's make sure we get those right. And then you deal with the exceptions or figure out how to improve it or whatever, which is a much different view than, oh, this is coming down. Somebody's giving me this SOP. They're telling me how to do my job, right? They're micromanaging me.
Sure. Sure. So based on that, do you think that there's a hybrid? Like I'm curious. It went down a path I didn't expect, which is phenomenal. But if success criteria is defined and the inputs are standardized, if you will, is an SOP outdated? Meaning, do you have to tell someone how to do the stuff in the middle? Or if you've defined success criteria well enough and the inputs are static, does it matter how they're performing the operation?
Now you get to the really interesting point of this. How do I define my SOPs? Um, am I defining them in terms of you do this task this way? Or am I defining it primarily in here are the results expected from this particular operation? And what
Sure.
do those results look and feel like? What's the qualities associated with it and so on. Now, the flip side of that is that for some things, and it depends also how much turnover I have. Do I have experienced people? Maybe people don't know how to do it. Maybe an SOP on how to do something is
Sure.
helpful. Maybe it's helpful to useful for training people. Or if I got somebody new in, right? Well,
Onboarding
here's
people.
how to do
Absolutely.
this. But let's take programming. Okay. So let me ask you a question and you think about it from an SOP perspective, right? So if you're hiring someone and you're hiring somebody you believe is competent for the particular situation, the language, the kind of product they're building, or whatever, most of the time, can you define what you're looking for in terms of results only, or do you have to tell them also some of the how?
So personally, it's a combination of both. And the reason why there's some element of how, particularly in software development, in my experience, is because it's more about environmental details. So while you may have been hired because you're an expert in JavaScript development, you may or may not use Docker, or you may or may not use, um, GitHub for your repository, or you may or may not be familiar with underlying technologies. You'll catch on, but a standard operating procedure or a standard process flow or being able to describe a little bit of the how usually goes a long way to shorten the learning curve on some of the new tech. And there's so much tech out there. It's almost impossible, right? I can't. It's almost impossible to find somebody who would meet all 17 of the criteria for a software development job for a given client. Instead, we look for the right attitude, we look for the right approach, we look for the right experience, and then exposure to majority of the major tools.
Okay, so let's use that as a as a jumping off point to another tangent here that's relevant. It's not just an irrelevant tangent. So let's take your example of GitHub. Let's say I bring somebody in, they're familiar with using versioning and tools, branching, whatever, from the standpoint of how to keep my repository for code, but they're not familiar with GitHub. Well,
Yep.
would you say with GitHub as well as any other tools that there are, we'll call them lessons learned or experience learned the hard way about here's a better way of using GitHub than not?
Absolutely. There's no question that the processes that we follow are primarily born from pain rather than joy.
Yeah, exactly. So this is another the reason I'm bringing it up is that this is another perspective that when people think about SOPs, they don't recognize that maybe it's a reminder for them, but it's also for someone who's new to the environment to understand what are the lessons we learned? What do we use here, for instance, and I'll use the term coding standards, which for people who don't program, it's the idea of, in a particular software language, here's how I format things, here's, the ways I use the different aspects of the language that we consider to be more successful than not. Well, that in a sense is like an SOP. It's just not the way that people think of an SOP. Standards are all over the place. I mean, if you take you know, aviation, spacecraft, medical devices, right? There are certain standards
Sure,
that equate to, well, this is what happened when we didn't do this in the past, right? Here are things that, should be followed, and it's different. It's a different motivation than, you used the word guidelines earlier. It's kind of like in the first Disney Pirates movie, guidelines, aren't they rules? Well, I mean, isn't the pirate code, rules? It's like, no, they're just more kind of like guidelines, Well, you got to be clear, right? What do you have to follow? What's a suggestion? And then, what do we don't know about? We'll figure it out when we get to it.
understood. Agreed. Um, it's not chiseled in stone. It didn't come off the mountain. It
Right.
can be adjusted. It can, right? So in the age of AI, out of curiosity, I've got some strong opinions on this, but where do you think is an SOP still relevant? Or what's a modern equivalent of an SOP in the age of AI in your mind?
Um, well, I'll just say I haven't actually thought in detail on the question. Let's go to something that you had mentioned in passing in the last episode is, okay, some of the pain with SOPs is keeping them up to date. So let's say I am either a software programmer and I'm using an AI copilot, or I'm building a marketing uh, piece or something. And the AI copilot knows what the coding standards are, it knows what the marketing conventions are that we follow. And I do something differently than those standards. So one thing is just to flag it and say, hey, you can't do that. Another option is, well, let's explore that. Is that a better way? Is this a one-off? Should we change the SOP? And then if the AI has the ability to change the SOP. I don't know if you'd want to do, blanket it, but at least do the draft,
Sure,
for circulation to others. That takes some of the work that creative people don't like to do, which is the administrivia, right?
sure, sure. Um, great suggestion. And it opens up, if you're in corporate America and you're having problem with your SOPs, tune in. um, it actually brings up a great, it's almost like process governance.
It
And
is.
aims for
It
process
is
governance.
a way of process governance in a
Yeah,
sense. And how do I change that to take advantage of AI and keep AI from changing everything when I don't want it?
that uh, this is how the world works, and this is how great things are found. What an absolutely awesome idea. So we've been doing a bunch of work with it, um, much smaller in scale than what you just described. Quite frankly, it's more of an interview process wherein a subject matter expert has a conversation with a AI agent or a chatbot, who then records what the process should be. And that's user defined. It can be as detailed or as intricate as needs be for whatever the process is. And then when an employee who's using that process, it can ask at any time, hey, I'm doing X and Y process. I'm doing end of month processing, and I just got done exporting the file from from QuickBooks. I don't know what to do next. Help. Well, they have a conversation with a chatbot. The chatbot knows because it was programmed to know, instructed to know, and it says, "Oh, well, this is your next step here. This is where you can pick it up." And of course, there's all kinds of, we'll call them pros, that come from that, in my opinion. Right? There's mitigation in case something happens. A lot of smaller companies that I've worked with have a subject matter expert. The company is filled with a couple of subject matter experts, but not a lot of people beyond those subject matter experts have the level of practice and understanding to be able to perform a lot of the functions that would happen, particularly end of month kind of stuff, or stuff that doesn't happen every day and frequently. Um, and I think that a tool like this would be beneficial for some of those type processes. I also love what you brought up from a standpoint of, if we've got a company-wide process, or if we've got a process that needs to meet certain guidelines, rules, uh, company standards,
Or
uh,
industry standards or
industry standards.
regulations, right?
I was just going to go regulation, exactly. I'm thinking FINRA, whatever, right? All of these type, HIPAA compliance, et cetera. Whenever someone goes to perform an action outside of that, it can be checked for them and bump them back onto rails. That's an absolutely phenomenal input. That's an
Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah. So here is one of the difficulties. I'll just say the con side with the state of where things are currently, right, is you need to consider how much it's the trust factor, right? How much am I going to trust the AI mechanism? If I have internally generated and or reviewed information it's been trained on. In other words, I can review a regulation, I can review a standard, fine. To the extent that it is referencing things external to the organization, things that haven't been reviewed. Now it brings back the factor of whoever is using the AI needs to be able to distinguish between good content and not so good content or just wrong content, right? So that's kind of the dividing line is if I trust it well enough to help kind of enforce the standards and so people have some kind of confidence level when I'm using it, that I'm getting good input, that's one thing. But if I'm still, for whatever reason, in the boat of where I have to tell, well, is this hallucinating? Is it giving me, good guidance or what? Then, it's going to be a mix. It's not going to be as straightforward yet, being able to have that kind of full governance point of view.
sure. My gut feeling there is that, and this is the advice that I give to almost everyone. There's very few times when I don't give this advice. And that is that, especially early on in the use of AI, it needs to be augmented, not automated. Human review of everything early on and feedback on the quality of the results, things that needed to be changed, that is so important early on. Um, there's other tricks, and not tricks because that sounds bad, but there's other strategies that can be implemented as well, including scoring systems, multiple reviews, multiple passes through the same engine to see if there's discrepancy. Um, the more, right, as we get into compliance or as we get into legal, as we get into financial, those mitigating systems to perform multiple reviews and have humans review have to be in place in order to use it. Absolutely. But
Yeah, and it's the still and the other fundamental thing, as I mentioned earlier, is what has it been trained on, and have we reviewed what it's been trained on, and have confidence in that,
yes,
as opposed to less than confident that it's going to have something else. Because if it's giving me wrong guidance, it may not be because it's just coming up with something. It may be because somebody was showing bad examples of some work out on the internet. It picked that up, and without appropriate context. If it didn't pick it up, it's going to give that as a suggestion, right? Of the wrong way of doing something, or mix
or
it into and say, well, you can do it this way or that way, right? And that way might be the wrong one.
absolutely, or conflicting data in either the training data or a combination of a conflict between the training data and what it gets from the LLM. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's whenever there's data discrepancy, that's when results start to get a little wonky. And for anybody who's elbow deep in it, I'll just throw this one out there. We've seen this, and when you're programming your agents, or whenever whomever is programming your agents, there's just a question to ask them, and that is, what happens when there's a conflict? How can we score? How can we have AI, an actual AI agent, score the answer to determine if there's a conflict or not?
Right. Yep.
There's systems that can be put in. Here's where I'm going. There's systems that can be built and put into place using AI agents that can score the output to help catch a lot of these problems before they ever make it past, before they ever make it to your screen, before they ever make it to a conversation with yourself, your employees, or potentially your clients.
Right.
And I got to tell you, that is a phenomenal segue into the article of the week.
Yeah, all right. So just to recapture that, right? So the idea is, we don't need to just have humans. We can configure AI systems that do the checking as well on the
Absolutely.
AI outputs, right? Not the same one, but other ones. So, yeah,
Absolutely.
there's lots more that we could talk about standard operating procedures. If you want, send us a question, we'll address it.
Yes.
But let's move on to the second segment, the article of the week, Nefarious Chatbots.
This one, all right. So here's how I want to start this. So in case you haven't noticed, um, yours truly is very excited about chatbots, about AI agents, about digital assistants, about generative AI, about where this may take us. I think I've been very forthcoming about how and why and my background. I see this as a wonderful tool. I see this as um, it's a springboard, right? We are building, we with the internet and how we've acquired information, we've got a ton of momentum down on that board. And this is just projecting us forward, in my opinion, because we're able to use the data that we've got, that training data, the LLMs, in new and different ways, generatively. It can generate conversation. It can generate art. Some people will say it's not art. It's art. I can't do it. um, Ideas, thoughts, new processes, shortcuts, better ideas. They're curing diseases. They're deciphering ancient hieroglyphics. There's all kinds of very exciting things for me. However, there are threats. That's all the more there is to it. There's definitely a threat with this. With any technological advancement, there's a threat. So I'm gonna jump in my DeLorean. I'm gonna make sure the flux capacitor is on. I'm going 88 miles an hour, and I'm gonna go back in time to the year 2000 with you. So
Now, only someone who, obsesses on details, a little bit of geek would actually even know the miles per hour as well as the DeLorean and the flux capacitor.
can't help it. um, in the year 2000, I was working at the help desk, and I got an email one morning, and it said, um, the subject of the email said, "I love you," and it had an attachment. And the email came from a gentleman that I helped the night before after hours. And I thought that he was being, whatever, sarcastic or cute or whatever, and was just sending me something that morning to tell me how much he appreciated my work. So I double clicked on the attachment and nothing happened.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Does anybody else remember what this means? This means that that was the I love you virus that propagated throughout our entire enterprise because at 4:30 that morning, somebody else opened the attachment and it sent it to
Yep.
everybody in the entire company. And then somebody else did it and somebody else did it. And before you knew it, everybody who was in everybody's address book was propagating an email to everybody's, right? And literally, we got a lesson in statistics from the domain administrator showing us how if everybody did it for everybody, it equated to, at the time, it was some, 400 gigabytes of data on the email server, and it crashed, and it was all kinds of fun and games from there. That was malicious code. So as I stepped forward in my IT career, there were times when malicious code came up again. There was the code red virus that spread itself to text files across all network shares if you weren't protected, and the list just goes on and on. It's a big pain. It's absolute garbage. Nowadays, you hear things like, ransomware and malware that screenshots your bank account. I don't know any of those details. I'm a white hat guy. I've never done anything like that. I don't have any interest because all of my energy on this kind of stuff is tied into just trying to get stuff to work, which brings up the threat of AI agents. Now, I'm not trying to be an alarmist. Like I said, I veer very heavily to the side of technology is good and this is useful. But I did read an article that caught my attention where it said that AI agents could potentially be a threat because cyber criminals can use them. And the way that the article outlined, and we can put it here, you can contact me, I'll give you the article. The way that the article made it sound, and they interviewed some people, HP Wolf Security, so that's Hewlett Packard, so that's a big name. They've been around a long time. Nobody just to brush off. Oh, they don't make computers anymore. Oh, they don't do AI. They're still legit, 100% legit. What they were talking about is they were talking about something that's as old as the internet, and that was script kiddies. And what a script kiddie is a person who doesn't really know what they're doing. They would go do a Google search and they'd find themselves on a Quora forum or maybe on the gray side of the internet, if you will, and they would get a chunk of code. They'd go to maybe one of these hosted sites, not hosted sites, but Stack Overflow or something like that. Somebody's working on something, they grab a chunk of code and they put it into their solution and it builds and their solution works, but they don't really understand how it worked. That is real. And that is a real problem. And it's not the first time in the world that anybody's ever been accused of that. It's completely legit. Now, when you do it, when you download a script from Stack Overflow for positive purposes, you're not called a script kiddie. But most of us learn by example pretty well. So the guys who are in it for malicious purposes, they're going to do the same thing. What this article suggested was that using AI chatbots to generate code shortens the amount of time someone can go from a malicious idea to actually being able to implement.
Oh,
That's a little
okay.
stupid.
I got it now, right? So the people who are trying to do not so nice things, they're going to use it as a productivity enhancer the same way that the people who are just trying to build positive things are. That's what you're
That's
saying, right? It accelerates the evil arc as well.
it accelerates their ability to perform action, potentially malicious action, faster without actually knowing what the underlying components are, what they do, what they
Right,
might
sure.
affect, etc. And it's actually, when I thought about it, and of course it hit my pride, and I said, well, I don't, but no, it's 100% true. Now, what's interesting is that the traditional approaches to finding code that's malicious, that could attack a vulnerability in your software. Um, Most of those traditional approaches center around a code signature, meaning um, bad code does stuff, and as soon as it's identified the first time, it's going to reuse that same signature, that same code, and they can catch it very quickly and block it very quickly.
So by signature, let me try to use a term that we've been using also in regard to AI. There's a certain pattern of
Pattern.
the output of the bad code, and there's something looking at all the things that are happening. For instance, if you have one of these on your computer, right, a security program, it's
Yep,
continuing looking for these patterns that are indicators of something not going right from a malicious code perspective.
that's correct. That's absolutely correct. Pattern is absolutely the right word. The new threat that I've got some friends in cybersecurity, um, and the new threat that they're facing is because of the generative nature of AI.
Mhm.
The pattern is new every time. Every time that code,
Oh, I see. So there's almost no way to have a pattern matching approach to catching it.
exactly. So if you think about a fingerprint being unique per human, um, think of a clone of a human being who's got the exact same fingerprint going all over the world, and it would be much easier to track down the clones. Code has a fingerprint, code has a pattern. Now, what's going to be challenging in the future is that generative AI creating code creates a slightly different pattern every time. So instead of just looking at code signature or code pattern, they have to adjust what they're looking at primarily to the behavior of what the code does.
Interesting.
And this is going to open up, if you're a cybersecurity nerd, congratulations, you're in demand for another couple of decades. This is not going to slow down either. Now, my gut feeling, and they didn't, it's interesting to me because this did not come up in conversation, but my gut feeling is to fight fire with fire. I believe that there's AI systems that can be built to identify patterns. That's what AI does really well right now, but patterns, predictive analysis, what are the most what's most realistic to be struck next? Why? Once someone is affected, what's the next step that happens? If you see that pattern, you can shut everything down. They didn't talk about AI integration and stopping AI yet. They'll get to it.
Right. So now we're developing the white hat hunter killer bots, right, to go after the black hat hunter killer bots.
It's my gut feeling is that um, there's also, it didn't come up in this article, but there's also conversations and rumors and stuff that's out there about we'll call them unrestricted LLMs. So the good guy LLMs, and not everybody feels this way about it. Maybe this will help change your mind a little bit, but OpenAI, you might think that's not a good guy LLM. They stole all their information from the internet and they hacked, George R.R. Martin's books, and it's all garbage, and you can get upset about it if you want. But those guys actually put filters and controls on their LLM. So a wannabe hacker can't go to OpenAI and say, hey, can you write me code that goes and shuts down everybody's email inbox using PowerShell? It won't do it. You won't get the results you're looking for. They've got filters and some level of control on there. Now, there are other LLMs that have been trained on the internet that sit out there. We won't go down that rabbit hole, that are unfiltered. So can you use one of those? Here's my gut feeling. My gut feeling is that we're going to have a world of listening AI bots, and they're going to be looking for certain behaviors out of the people or the other bots using AI. And when something gets flagged as potentially malicious, they're going to go and shut that down. And then, of course, they'll build better.
Or at least do an alert, right? They may not
Yeah,
have the
exactly.
power to shut it down, but at least alert, just like a lot of security software on your computer does. Sometimes it does things automatically. Sometimes it says,
Sure.
boy, you need to look at this.
Sure. Sure. 100%. Um, as an example, we talked about it a week or two ago. Maybe we talked about it last week. We talked about it even the week before. OpenAI released a new model. It's this reasoning model, 401, aka Strawberry. And in the first couple of days of that, there were a lot of people trying to hack the model to get it to explain to them what its chain of thought, like the actual code chain of thought that it was using. And those accounts got an email from OpenAI that said, you use some keywords, and if you do that again, we're going to close out your account. So yeah, to your point, alerting works early on. So
Okay. Well, I mean, so the purpose of bringing up these articles isn't only for just awareness or things that are happening out there, or if you're interested to get involved in it, but if you're looking for areas to invest, that's an area of opportunity. So
absolutely.
multiple ways to look at this. And with that, we should wrap up this week. Anything else you want to say from a closing perspective, Stephen?
I just want to tell everybody happy October. It's October the 1st, 2024. I love the month of October for a lot of personal reasons. I hope everybody has a wonderful day, week, and month of October. Ended up with Halloween.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, everyone.
All right.